Good morning and welcome to Shattering Myths. I am Yahowah. Each weekday morning here on GCN, we strive to expose the destructive and deadly myths that are associated with religion and politics, with patriotism in the media, and with military and economic schemes. Instead of merely presenting the news, our mission is to understand what is occurring behind these headlines, all while predicting how the events we'll be discussing will shape our world over the next 5, 10, and 15 years. Typically during our second hour, although this is a Friday, so we're expecting to have IQ al-Rassooli call in from Europe this morning. So this morning on our first hour, we will be engaging God on his terms by way of his one and only covenant and through his always dependable Torah teaching. We do so because with his guidance, we can all replace any vestiges of religion that may still stain our souls with reason, and thereby engage in a relationship with Yahowah. Our phone number, if you'd like to question, criticize, or affirm, or just engage in a discussion at any time over the next 2 hours, including the second hour when we'll have IQ al-Rassooli with us to discuss Islam. We'll compare IQ al-Rassooli's understanding of Islam, and particularly the word jihad, to the President of the United States' attempt to define the word. And our number is toll-free, 877-300-7645. With that known, let's now turn to God's testimony as we discussed something that is important for us to do in terms of just understanding God's position on how we have the opportunity to engage in a relationship with him, and as a result of that relationship to be saved by him. In the third of the three general statements that Yahowah etched on the first of two tablets. Now, understand there are two tablets because there was a system to what God had to say. You know, we always have been told that there were 10 commandments, and the commandments, when they're presented, are always somehow presented on one tablet, and they're always truncated to just have a snippet. Like, for example, the first one, I am the Lord your God. And you realize, wait a minute, it doesn't say that at all. You know, it says, I am Yahowah, your God. And then it goes on to, after he introduces himself, to tell us the role that Yahowah plays in our life, where he introduces himself as our Savior. And then he says that because I am your Savior, because I am God, and I'm the only God, if you wish to worship or observe or speak on behalf of or get all religious and fuzzy and cozy with another God or any God by any other name, you're not going to continue to exist, and you're not going to be in my presence. You will not enter my presence if you are speaking of a God that is any other than Yahowah. In the second, you know, we find on the pretend versions of this, do not carve a false idol. Do not carve a graven image. And while there is an admonition that we ought not make idols, that's about 1% of the instruction that God carved on this first of these two tablets. And it was two tablets, because on the first of the two tablets you have these three sweeping statements that, for the most part, the statements are designed to convey the conditions and the provisions of the covenant. And then on the second of the two tablets, there are 7 instructions. God's pattern, his formula, is always the same. 6 + 1 = 7. And in this particular case, 3/4 of the second tablet is comprised of the first of those 7 instructions. It is the most important of the 7. They're listed in order of importance. And God, in the first of the 7 instructions, explains his formula, which is 7, and explains it based upon the Shabbat, which is God telling us that He wants us to rest while he settles our debts and he settles us in his home. And that we can do whatever we want, 6 days a week, work your little fanny off. But on the seventh day, I want you to pay attention to our relationship. I want you to prioritize it. I want you to think about and to learn about our relationship. Not too much to ask that you prioritize it at least to that level. After all, if we end up becoming family, we're going to spend all eternity together. So, 1 day a week during your mortal life might not be too much to ask. So the third statement that is written on the first of those tablets is devoted to telling us that we should not deceive. If you read it in a truncated version on a courthouse wall, it says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." Well, there is no mention of Lord. Nasa, which is the term that has been convoluted to take, does not mean take. You can't take a name. And how do you apply vain to a name? I mean, vain only has two connotations. One is failed. So how do you say that do not take a name in a failed way? Or as inept. Well, excuse me, not inept. Inept would be like vain. The second is egotistically. Vain, someone who is vain is egotistical, and something which is in vain is a failure. How do either of those concepts apply to taking a name? They don't. And Shoah, depending on if you pronounce it as it was originally pronounced or how the Masoretes would like it pronounced today, only means vain in the sense of utter failure. But that doesn't make any sense if you improperly translate NASA as take. So let's actually look at what God said, because what he said is a treatise against religion. It's a treatise against doing what the truncated versions of the Ten Commandments show on the courthouse walls. God actually says, wrote in stone, engraved in stone, you should never deceive or delude, NASA, through the name or reputation, Shem, of Yahowah, your God, Elohim, advancing worthless and lifeless deception. Laha Shoah. For indeed, Yahweh will never forgive nor leave unpunished those who consistently deceive, actually beguile, or habitually delude in association with his name, to promote or affect vain and ineffectual lies which lead to lifelessness and destruction. Shemoth names, Exodus 27. Very powerful, very clear statement. God has presented in his Torah the means for us to engage in an eternal, family-oriented, covenant relationship with him. God's promises relative to the covenant are fivefold, the first of which is to make us immortal. The second is to make us perfect. The third is to adopt us into his family as his children. The fourth is to enrich us, both through the inheritance that he has to give and through the instruction he can provide through his Torah. And the fifth is to empower us, to make us much greater than we already are. We're a 3.5-dimensional entity now. We will be 7-dimensional. And God is saying that if you aren't reflecting his strategy, his plan, his offer to make us immortal and perfect and to save us and adopt us into his family, to enrich us and to empower us, then what you're doing is you're deceiving people and leading them towards their own destruction, to squandering their lives, Everyone who has embraced the religion of Christianity, according to God, has ingested the plague of death. Yesterday we had a marvelous caller. Paul called in from Canada. And we talked about what happens to all of those who ingest Paul's poison, who believe in his religion. God answered the question. So did Yahusha. Yahusha said that the broad way, the popular way, leads to the death and destruction of one's soul. Yahowah, calling out Paul by name, said that his popular and broad path was a plague of death. That's the answer. And so God is saying, don't embrace that stuff. Don't advance it. Don't bear it. Don't support it. Don't tolerate it. And most certainly don't be part of it. If you want to do something worthwhile, share Yahweh's testimony. Observe it, examine it, consider it, think about it, come to understand it, respect it, embrace it, act upon it, benefit from it, and then by all means share it. But do not advance the lifeless deceptions of man. Don't quote Paul. Don't study Paul unless it is to refute him. Don't quote Muhammad. Don't study Muhammad unless it is to refute him, to expose him, to condemn him. That's what God is saying here. And by using NASA, he is telling us that he does not want us to even associate with these people. You know, the notion in political correctness is that we should be tolerant. Of course, in political correctness, they are completely intolerant of anyone who is intolerant of their mantra. But nonetheless, putting the hypocrisy aside, God is saying here, I don't want you to be tolerant. Now, this notion that God is somehow tolerant is absolutely errant. He's not. And he doesn't want us to be either. One last thought before we move on to the concluding statement regarding these instructions is that Nasha, using clever trickery, misleading, was written in the imperfect, which says that what God is looking for is not for us to be perfect, but for us not to make a practice of deceiving. It's an important distinction. We'll be back in a moment. Back to Shattering Myths. I'm your host, Yetta. You can participate in this, co-host the show with me if you would like by calling 877-376-45. When Yahowah had completed reciting his 10 instructions to the children of Israel, and after Moshe had repeated what Yahowah said, repetition is a very powerful thing. We do it a lot on this program. I do it a lot in my books. Yahowah does it consistently through his Torah teaching. And the reason that we repeat is because through repetition we come to retain information. And when we repeat things, we also find the opportunity to learn and incorporate into our lives what we are learning. So God does it on a regular basis. Moshe, after he had done it, after Yahowah had done it, shared this summation of what he had learned from these 10 statements. This is found now in Devarim, which means words, corrupted to Deuteronomy 10, 20, and 21. You should revere and respect Yahowah, your God. That's really the natural conclusion of all of this. As I studied Yahowah's word initially, I began in a book called Yahowah, and that book's available free at yahowah.com. It's my initial foray into Yah's prophetic testimony. And I got involved in it because I was fascinated with prophecy. And then I found that even the creation account is prophetic. And the more that I studied Yah's testimony, the more I was impressed with the story he was telling. The way he was presenting himself, not egotistically as a God we should worship, but as a father who wanted to have a relationship with you and me. And the more I read, the more I was impressed with his ability to communicate, his ability to, well, I was going to say predict the future. I'm not sure that's the right term, because God really isn't a prophet. He's actually witnessed our future and therefore simply reporting our future to us in our past. But his teaching is just extraordinary. And so when I began to realize that his Torah was not a set of laws to obey, in fact, there is no Hebrew word for obey, and Torah means teaching, guidance, direction, instruction. And instructions and guidance and teaching is something that you examine and then consider. And once that frame of mind occurred within me, as opposed to the perspective of laws to obey, the radical change to instructions to listen to and to process and to evaluate, I came to revere and respect Yahowah. That was the natural progression of things. But I could not come to revere and respect him prior to coming to know him and know what he was saying, knowing what he was offering, knowing how he was presenting himself. Until you come to know someone, you can't revere and respect him. You don't start there. That's why Moshe did not start here. This is in Devarim, the last book of the Torah, or the second to last book, whether or not you include the book of Yahusha. And so here we have a conclusion, a summary. That was my conclusion. I came to revere and respect Yahowah. I like God. It might sound silly to say, I like him. But I do. I like him. I enjoy his company. He's got a sense of humor. Brilliant. Fun to be around. I like learning. He's a great teacher. I am particularly intrigued with rhetoric, with the intelligent presentation of ideas and their logical consequences. I'm not claiming that I'm a master of rhetoric, anything but. I'm not claiming that I'm the world's greatest debater, anything but. I'm just telling you I appreciate it. You know, it's kind of like I will watch some of the Game 6s tonight in the NBA. I play basketball, but I'll guarantee you I am not good enough to play at that level. I was barely good enough to play at a high school level. But that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the skill of those and the athleticism of those who will be performing tonight. That's my view of God and his use of rhetoric. I'm a huge fan of rhetoric, of logic and reason, of evidence being presented, and of the opportunity to make connections between things, and the understanding of probabilities and how they lead to conclusions. And God is an absolute expert at this. And so I've come to revere and respect him. To Shattering Myths. If you want to join this discussion, our number is area code 877, toll-free, 300-7645. So this summation begins, you should revere and respect Yahowah, your God. That's the choice we should all make. But to make that choice, you first have to come to know him. This idea that Christians write that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God. Well, you can't love the Lord unless you're loving Satan. That's who the Lord is Satan. So you ought not to do that, and you can't come to love somebody unless you know who they are, and getting to know someone, particularly someone as important as God, necessitates knowing his name. So, this begins, you should revere and respect Yahowah, your God, and you should serve with him. But that's, again, the nature of family. When we are in a family, for example, after dinner, we do the dishes together. As a family, we pick up the house together. When we are very young, it is true that our parents serve us. And so it is also true in the covenant. When we're just joining the covenant, when we are babes in the covenant, Yahowah serves us. He has no issue with that. In fact, that's what he wants to do. It's what he's chosen to do, to get down on his knees, to diminish an aspect of himself, to lift us up. That's what loving fathers do. But as we grow up in this family, life in the family is so much more enjoyable, so much more productive. The relationship is so much deeper and richer and beneficial if we both participate and we work together. And work is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You know, is it work to study Yah's testimony? Absolutely. But it's an enjoyable endeavor. And this is the nature of God. He does not want us to work for him. He does not want us to serve him. Doesn't say that at all. He says he wants us to work with him. He wants us to serve with him. Joining closely and associating with, Dabak, that's the whole purpose of all of this, is so that we can join with and associate with and be united with in a close relationship with Yahowah. And the way that we work with Yahowah is then delineated by the next thing that Moshe says, affirm the truth. I received a nice letter this morning from Paul, from Canada, who called in yesterday, and he said, I'm enjoying getting to read and think about your teaching. And my response to him was that to the greatest extent possible, I try not to have my teaching. I don't want anyone to view this program or any of the books that I've written, Introduction to God, for example, Yada Yah, for example, or Questioning Paul. I don't want anyone to view them as my teaching. That would be completely inappropriate of me to present it as my teaching, because each of these books is based upon what Yahowah has taught us. So the full extent of all of this is to do as Moshe is summarizing here, to affirm the truth of Yahowah in his personal and proper name. The goal of these books is to present what Yahowah said as clearly, as completely, and as accurately as possible, and then to reflect on what he has said. It is the strategy that Dode, whom we have corrupted to David, Dode means love, the strategy that he encourages us to follow is presented in the 119th Psalm. It's the longest psalm. It has 8 verses in this psalm dedicated to each of the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and he presents these concepts ordered in the order of the Hebrew alphabet, starting with Aleph, and he then takes what is the meaning of that letter, because each letter in the Hebrew alphabet originally was drawn as a pictograph, symbolizing something. Like the first letter is a ram's head. It symbolizes the Lamb of God, God's authority, God's power. And the second letter happens to be the floor plan of a home, that God is head of the household because the first word in Hebrew combines these first two letters. And it has the head of the household, which would be father, and it's the first word in the Hebrew language, father. So what I have found is that if you study Yah's testimony and you simply affirm his truth by making these kinds of connections, by sharing these kinds of insights, that you learn. That's how I learn. And so these books, this program, is nothing more than sharing what Yahowah has revealed to us, what he has provided in terms of education and a learning opportunity. It's nothing more, nothing less than that. Larry has called in from Florida, so before we complete this thought, it's my pleasure to welcome Larry to the program. Hi, Larry. How are you today?
I'm great, Yada. I'm enjoying the show here. One of the things that you just brought up, he wants us to work with him. That means help get his word out that he's real, that he's there, that he's not a religious deity. He's not thumping us on the head saying, work for me and be obedient. Like a dog.
Let me just comment on that, because let me read what Moshe said again. He said, you should choose of your own volition to revere and respect Yahowah, your God, and you shall serve with him, you shall work with him, joining closely to and associating with him, affirming the truth in his personal and proper name. Now, did he say affirming the faith?
No. That had nothing to do with any religious idea at all.
Right. So since truth is that which can be known and can be confirmed, is there any correlation between truth and a religious belief?
No. I mean, not unless you draw one in your mind somehow. Obviously, most of the religious writing I've seen use copy edits to usurp the truth. Or, that's how I see it.
So let me ask you a question. Did God deploy a strategy to prove that he was telling us the truth? Did he just say, I'm God, therefore, since I'm God, everything I say is true, and you ought to believe it, take it or leave it? Did he take that approach, or did he deploy a strategy that proves that what he said is trustworthy and true?
Well, he deployed a strategy because things fold out exactly the way he says they're going to, perfectly, on time, in the manner he said there. That's called prophecy.
Correct. Yeah. In fact, when I began writing Yahowah, one of the things that I came to realize is that this notion that people choose either to believe there's a God or not believe there's a God really isn't the question. It shouldn't even be part of the nomenclature of our society, because God absolutely, unequivocally proves his existence. The agnostic says, I can't know if God is there or not, so I'm just going to choose to say I don't know. Or the atheist says, I'm certain there is no God. Well, the actual
God... They haven't checked it out lately.
The actual God proves that he exists and that he authored his Torah and prophets because he fills them with future history.
That all play out in the exact manner he says they will.
Right. And so this is not Nostradamus, where you're looking at this litany of predictions which are all vague, which aren't in any way related to one another, and which some seem in a vague way to come true and others don't. Yahowah's testimony says, this is the standard I want you to apply to me. I'm going to present you history. I'm going to present you future history, past history and future history.
By the way, there's all kinds of archaeologist spades that are digging up proof of the past history.
Yes, so I'm going to speak to that just in a second. He says, so I'm going to present you a story of your history, from the creation of the universe all the way to its ultimate destruction. And in that history, both past and future, the standard that I want you to apply to me, and I'm going to give you tens of thousands of statements, both past and future history.
Is that I'll never be wrong.
Never once. Never once. If you find a single mistake then you are free to discredit everything I've said.
Yeah.
But if you can't find a single mistake in anything that I've said, past, present, or future, then you ought to realize that the likelihood of that I got this right by chance is, well, I took just 25 of the more interesting prophecies regarding the Messiah. Took 25 of them, and I ran the odds against chance fulfillment, and it came to 1 in 10 to the 55th power.
Oh,
Now, there
55th. Well, that's more atoms than there are in the universe. I mean,
yes,
that's incredible.
That's correct. Yes, actually, it's more even than fundamental particles, and there are in the entire universe. And so you're dealing with, if the odds were 1 in a billion, you'd say, yeah, he didn't get lucky. If you're going to say the odds are 1 in a billion billion, or a billion billion billion, but here we're dealing with 1 in over the 50th, times 10 to the over 50th power. You're dealing with numbers so big that the mind is incapable of even processing them. And so God has, and that's just 25 predictions on one topic. And those really aren't his most amazing predictions. I mean, one of my favorite is the one that we see play out every day in the newspaper. Speaking of Ishmael's descendants, Ishmael is the acknowledged father of Islam.
Yeah, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. Yeah.
And it'd be wild asses of men.
Yep.
With his hand against his brother's hand raised against him. Look at the Sunni-Shia conflict. Look at the overall conditions and the attitude of Muslims throughout the world. Look at the fact that they live in hostility with the whole world. God got every prediction right, including what he said was going to happen in the 4th day of creation, the 4th millennia of human existence after we were expelled from the garden,
showed up
and fulfilled the moed just as it was promised. We'll return to Shattering Myths in a moment. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We're in the last segment of our Torah hour. We have Larry on the phone. So the conclusion to our last discussion, Larry, is that Yahowah absolutely proved that he was telling the truth.
One of the things that really shook me was realizing that the word relativity, and Yahowah was speaking of relativity in Bereshith in the beginning, what's called Genesis today.
Right.
When I became to understand that the 6 days that he was talking about really equals 15 billion years our time, and the two are tied together, I said, this is no. This is no accident. This is an amazing awakening. And then I began to really seriously, at that point, listen to Yahweh's words as opposed to men's words. And that's what woke me up. Because science is no accident. And Yahowah is the father of science, by the way. The Smithsonian Institute scientists are nothing to him. They study his work. And what I realize now is that all science, and then based on the way further, that the way time rolls out, something equivalent to a radioactive half-life, is that everything he said he made in each epoch of time is what shows up in the fossil record.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, this is not Christian science any longer. This is science.
Right.
And this is based on Yahweh's words. And I just wanted to pass that on. That's what shook me awake. And I said, whoa, I better start listening to Yahweh's words.
Yeah, it is truly enlightening and amazing. In fact, this next line that Moshe says on behalf of all of us is, he is our source of light. He is your God who relationally and beneficially has prepared and produced great and awesome things for us. It is true that in the second day of his creation, Yahowah uses the Hebrew term for relativity 3 or 4 times. Just in that 4 times in that presentation. And God tells us initially that he is equated to light, and that the first thing that he spoke into existence was light. And as we now study light, particularly in hindsight of Einstein's realization that time is relative based upon one's either speed or presence of proximity to great energy or great mass, and that time is relative based upon the perspective of the individual. And so,
the more dense and the more hot,
of course,
we make an object,
right.
but the shorter and the quicker the light wave.
Right. So we've been able.
It takes more time for that light wave to stretch,
right.
doesn't it?
Yeah. So what we have learned, Larry, is that if you look at the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is still can be observed in our universe from the aftermath of the Big Bang, and that's a term that Yahowah himself uses. He speaks of
the line. He uses a word whose base means Big Bang. So the people that came out with the Big Bang theory, sorry, he beat you by 3,500 years.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And so what we learn from the cosmic microwave background radiation is that the wavelength is stretched by 10 to the 12th power. That means that time...
There are ways to measure that, and they all come out to 10 to the 12th.
That's correct. And 10 to the 12th stretching of that wavelength tells us that time at the point of creation, by a witness at creation, and therefore the Creator's time clock, moved at 10 to the 12th slower than a clock would move, or time would seem to flow here on Earth. So that when you do the math, 6 24-hour days from the perspective of someone at creation would be exactly 14 to 15 billion years looking back from our perspective, because time flows so much faster on Earth today than time flowed according to the cosmic microwave background radiation some 14 to 15 billion years ago. And so we can do the math to show that Yahowah's perspective, and he's speaking from creation as the Creator, is exactly 26 24-hour days. And then when you realize that everything that he said that he did actually occurred in that order, in that period of time, and that we can verify all of this today, if you look at the fact that this was written down 3,500 years ago, you come to realize there is a 0% possibility that some shepherd just happened to get it right. We'll return to Shattering Myths in a moment.